All right, well, thanks for checking out this YouTube video. So I'm David Birnbaum, this is Tyler Herchuk, and we're doing a video series called Social Commentary. So what we're going to do is we're going to watch different television shows or other videos that make commentaries on society, and we're going to talk about if we think they're accurate and what we think those commentaries say about society now and the future of society. So the first video we're going to talk about is actually the first episode of Black Mirror. Definitely check it out. Spoilers ahead, obviously. If you don't know, the first episode of Black Mirror is, the premise is that the Princess of England is kidnapped and the kidnapper wants the Prime Minister to have sex with a pig in order for her to be released. So we're going to talk about kind of what happens in that episode and how we think that relates to society now and what might happen if that situation actually did arise. I think I kind of want to start, go through as it progresses. And so the first thing is really the virality of it, right? I think that is really I do think that's how it would kind of go out, right? Because of the internet and things like that, they didn't need to send it directly to the Prime Minister or anything. They just put it out there and knew it would be seen. What do you think about the spread of that and the spread of videos nowadays? How even bad content, if people find it interesting, it just spreads uncontrollably.
Well, first I want to say I'm glad that you took that off your leg. I was going to make a comment about that as soon as if you didn't move it. Yeah, it was kind of scary how quickly it got around. Obviously, it was only up for about 9 minutes, and in those 9 minutes, it garnished 50,000 views, something like that.
And so many downloads and clones.
Exactly. And I think part of maybe the lack of believability, in my opinion, is that in 9 minutes, I don't think it would garnish that much. Just you have to think about the tags that he used.
Yeah.
Right? Obviously.
Yeah.
A lot of people right off the bat would assume it was fake. In the show, a lot of people did, again, assume it was fake until the actual news picked it up.
Yeah.
But I think that for the purpose of the show, that was kind of inflated a bit.
Okay, that's fair. But it is interesting. I think then, once the news picked it up and once it was kind of verified, it, spread into the millions and globally, even though it's, bad content, like you're watching a woman plead for her life, and
right.
It's kind of like when ISIS would release videos. It was a very useful tool for spreading fear. Mm-hmm. Why do people want to watch these things, right? I think that part was accurate, is that it would spread eventually, maybe not so quickly in the first 9 minutes, but why, would we watch it? Would you watch it?
I think it's like a car crash. You don't want to look at it, but you can't look away.
Yeah.
And the same thing with the ongoing footage. I mean, just jumping quickly to the end of the episode, they show it, and it's like an hour-long session, and everyone is still watching it. And they're watching through, their hands. They shouldn't be watching it, but they can't look away.
Yeah. I think that's interesting. And, playing on the journalism piece, there's two parts. One is, the journalists were trying to hold out at first, right? Because, it's what is the balance between the journalists, being journalists or just reacting to the internet? It feels like now information and things happen so quickly that journalism is actually just reacting. It's not proactive anymore. Stuff happens and then they talk about it, right? But also, so, they didn't want to respond, or they tried not to respond, and it's actually the American media that ends up coming in and ruining the UK's plans to try and keep a handle on it. But what role do they play in the coverage of something like this?
Well, I think it was interesting when they showed the background, the roundtable at UKN, the news network that was kind of being followed, where I would assume the highest up in the room was more focused on his relationship with the politicians in the situation and the network and stuff like that. Whereas there were other couple people, the one reporter in particular who was ended up sending, some news to try to get some information. She was focused, you assume she was focused on bringing the truth and trying to get all this information out to the public, but you also have to assume maybe it was a bit of a selfish endeavor on her part. She wants to get the breaking story, right? So I think that in a situation like that, you have to think about people's motivations.
Yeah.
And yeah, it is funny how the Americans, of course, were the ones that ultimately broke the news. Like, they didn't really care, you know. It's like, it's news, get it out there. But I like the timeline in that. Obviously, they took some time to, you know, to pick up the story because it broke in the UK, right? Which I think is realistic. Obviously, it starts on YouTube in the UK, and then maybe it trickles down a little bit, and then the networks pick it up.
Yeah, that's fair. But also, I think it still comes down to me, like, they waited to validate it at least, right? Or potentially. I feel like now it's actually sometimes worse. If something went viral enough, virality is news now, right? So if something all of a sudden got, you know, 1 million views or, 100 million views in a couple days or over one day, right? That becomes news in and of itself. So, you know, this video ended up being real, but it makes me think of, if it wasn't, would it still have gotten a lot of coverage, right? Because, you know, once there hits a point, people are talking about it. If it's trending on Twitter, you know, the news talks about what is trending on Twitter now, which, you know, kind of seems backward to me.
Mm-hmm. Right. And in the situation here, at no point did the Prime Minister, you know, confirm the validity of the video, and nobody really did the parties come out at one point and say, or the news said that it was confirmed to be real?
Yeah,
they did. Okay.
When the news finally started broadcasting it, they did confirm it was real, which I think is important, and that is actually something that I don't know if they do. Like, when I watch the American media in particular, and I don't know about like Canadian cable channels, but you know, they hope it's real, but they also, it's about, you know, getting the story first, right? It's not about getting it right, it's about getting it first. And even, you know, that female reporter put her life at risk to get the story first, right? And I think because, you know, any random person can beat a news station to the story now and get the most views and things like that, because like yeah.
Exactly, and she showed up on what she believed to be the right location with, you know, a news crew. She goes back into the bush, she sees the news crew's been apprehended, so she just runs in with her camera. And in this day and age, anybody can do that. Anybody can bring the news, which I think is interesting, but also a bit scary.
Yeah, and then, yeah, that's true. But so then we get to the point of like, okay, yeah, this is a good segue, because that's really the point where now, okay, they're not going to save her. You know, now what? Now, you know, they were trying to, you know, use tech to fool the person, but he figured that out again because someone took a picture and tweeted it, right? Mm-hmm. Someone recognized the porn star and tweeted it, and then, you know, it ruined their plan of circumventing his rules, which is, again, just, you know, people, even when it's like a matter of national security, people are just, one, nosy, but also need to tell, like, I don't know, the opposite of nosy, but they need to tell everyone. They're like, well, in Yiddish you say yenta, right? Like, they're infinite gossips. So, like, you know, the news tried to hold back, but people don't still. So, like, you know, I think that says a lot as well, is that we all would take pictures and tweet about it too.
Yeah, and I'm kind of surprised that nobody did anything to the guy that took the picture. Because they made a big deal about it. You know, it was like, oh, I'm Rod, senseless, whatever. And then they were like, oh, you know, get in the studio. But the guy, literally, you saw him, he took the picture, then he looked down and he was immediately trying to upload
That's the one thing in the whole episode that I didn't like, because I was like, they would have confiscated that immediately.
Right.
And like, they shot the reporter's phone, but they let this guy tweet.
Right.
That was the piece that like didn't seem realistic, like didn't fit with the realism of the story.
Mm-hmm. And in the end, when you see who was the kidnapper and everything, you see he wasn't really running a very high-tech operation, or it appears that way at least. So I think they had to show that guy keeping his phone to show that the information got out there. Because even if in that short period of time they took the guy's phone away and they confiscated it, if the kidnapper had enough technology, you could still assume that maybe, you know, he had somebody else looking out, or, you know, there was a network of something. So I think that has to kind of pinpoint how he found out.
Yeah, that's fair.
I guess.
And I think, you know, so now moving to the actual act, because, you know, they got caught, they couldn't save the princess. Now the Prime Minister, you know, has to do it. And like, I mean, we could do a whole other video on what he went through in this episode, right? Like, you know, all over the place. But you know, from society's point of view, it's interesting. Like, you know, would the politician do that? It's a very difficult thing. And you know, they kept talking about polling, right? How would this poll? And that, like, it drives me nuts. But I really think that is, you know, what politicians live and breathe, is how will this affect their popularity? And so at first they were like, oh, you can let her die, it won't affect the polls. And then it was like, no, if you let her die, you're ruined forever, right? And it's like, it seemed like the humanity of it barely mattered. It was the popularity, like, and just what people viewed. And it's also interesting to me how quickly that we know how that can change. Because before Twitter and stuff, you couldn't really know how this developed in society, right? You would just be developing, even if all of the news were covering it, you wouldn't know live how people are responding. But because of Twitter and all of that, you know people's reactions and responses at all times now.
Exactly. And the fact that right away he's like, this is a joke, right? There's no way this is true. And then he's kind of going through the motions. He's like, oh, it is true. Yeah, I'm definitely not doing it. And then you see the polling results, and it's like, yeah, you know, 28% or whatever. But watching it, obviously I don't hold the position of power he does. Watching it, I'm like, well, if the princess is going to die and I have to do this thing, I'll do this thing, right? But it was important for him to refuse for so long because, one, you know, from a political point of view, if he does it, you know, without any fight, then obviously all these other demands will come in. You have to do this, you have to do that, you have to, you know,
yeah,
all the different animals, right?
Yeah.
Go through the zoo. But the other thing is, too, it kind of really shows how much more the actual act psychologically affected him because he was so against it.
Yeah.
And he was just, like, thinking it over so hard. Like, not doing it, definitely not doing it, definitely not doing it. And then, you know, they find out about trying to cover it with CGI, and he freaks out, and he actually, you know, throttles his advisor.
Yeah.
Which I think is ridiculous. But, I mean, obviously he was heated.
But so then from, you know, society's point of view, he's now doing it and they're asked to not watch. Obviously you're watching, you know, a person in as about an indecent situation as you can think of, and people eat it up, right? People, they're like, when he comes on screen at first, they're like, yeah, right? And so that, you know, that makes me think that's the biggest piece of this, right? Is would people watch now, or if something that bad happened, and would they cheer? Like this is what you were saying earlier. It's kind of like the car crash, right? Like, but what does it say about us that we would watch this, right? We wouldn't. It's not like we would watch it to enjoy it, and it's not even we're watching something we're indifferent about. We're literally choosing to watch something that is like horrible for us and for someone else.
Right, and you have to think about the person who's doing it, right? Obviously, this is a fictitious prime minister, but, I mean, this is probably not the best analogy, but imagine Donald Trump doing it versus Barack Obama doing it, right? I think the majority of people would be like, oh, like, I want to see Trump do it because I want to see him being, like, you know, scarred for the rest of his life, whereas I think people would have actually turned the TV off if Obama was doing it. Some people would, because they respect him, you know, in the global view. He has a better reputation, I guess, internationally and locally. So I think that that prime minister probably didn't have a great reputation beforehand, and people wanted to see him kind of, you know, do that to himself.
Yeah, it's still, to me, it also, like, I think of the video that comes to mind the most, because obviously you can't really censor the internet very well, and the thing that comes to, you know, there was when Saddam Hussein was assassinated, right? Yeah. Like that, you know, was shared on the internet and things like that, and I'm pretty sure I watched it at the time, and it's like, why would I want to watch that, right? Like, and I don't know how old I was, but still, it's like, that's, you know, someone's life being ended, and like people who share the, you know, ISIS beheading videos and things like that. Like you know, it makes me like, you know, second guess myself and honestly kind of society at all, that we, you know, it's infinite possibilities to do this now, but people do watch this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I'm kind of disappointed they didn't say anything about Live Leak, because Live Leak is the corner of the internet that has all those types of videos, right?
Yeah.
Although the initial hostage video, there was no, no swearing, no violence, none of that, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, like, I think really what it comes down to is, I think that was a pretty good, first episode of Black Mirror, because at first it seems like, a fairly basic situation, and it really does hit on like a lot of points that I think it plays pretty accurately how I see it would actually play out, right? Like some of the Black Mirror episodes are quite far-fetched technologies or situations, but this one, like if this happened tomorrow, God forbid or whatever, then I think it would play out fairly similarly to this.
Yeah.
But so going back to like I'll probably cut this out as a separate video.
Right.
But going back to the overall thing, so we find out at the very end that she was released early, and then like before it actually happened, and the head female advisor says like, oh, it was a statement, right? He knew everyone would be looking at their screens, and that's what really hits it home is no one was looking for her anymore. If they were still looking for her, someone would have seen her. She was released a half hour early, but
Right.
she was just, they made a point of it was deserted. Everyone was watching their screens.
Exactly.
Right? And it's like they had given up on looking for her, but also, like we're just so absorbed with what's going on. And I think that is like, it's a perfect lead into the rest of Black Mirror, right? And it's, people are so absorbed with what's on their screen that they're blind to what's going on around them, and they missed the fact that she had been freed.
And I made a comment about that. I'm like, there's no way everyone would be inside, doing this and watching that and whatever.
But I think most people would, if it was like, and there's one line that's like, they were a part of history. Right? People like to feel like they're a part of something, even if it's something bad.
1.3 billion viewers or something was the total. And then you see that the person behind this whole thing was, an artist, and it was an art installation, and he ended up, ending his life just to prove a point.
Yeah.
Right? I guess he just didn't want to get caught either.
Yeah.
I think that one thing that might have made that a little bit more poignant would have been if the way that it was shown is it showed her getting released at about the same time that the video started. Maybe if it had showed her getting released a bit earlier, like in terms of the timeline.
It showed her like on the bridge
I guess
around
that's
the same
true.
time. You
Right.
don't know where she came from.
That's true.
But I think the point was no one knew where she came from, right? Like we were watching him, because it kind of played back and forth through different settings, but by the time it was actually happening, like visually we were watching him only, and so was the rest of the world.
Right.
So no one paid attention to her, right? I think that storytelling came across pretty well in that regard.
Right, no, that's a good point. What did you think about the use of blackberries? That seemed kind of unrealistic. No, good.
All right. Well, I think that was a pretty good first episode of Black Mirror, and I found it very interesting. But I do think some of the other episodes will be much more, we'll be able to much more like tactically talk about, because it's kind of more far fetched. But I'd love to hear what you thought about that episode and stuff as well. And thanks for watching. Cool.
Good stuff.